four of us have some areas of we are now recording, so I'll start that sentence over. Today we're talking about the business side of quilting. And you'll see that the four of us have a lot of overlap, but we also have four different approaches. So we're hoping that there will be some ideas here that you can kind of treat like a buffet bar. Pick your favorite ones and make your own plate out of. We don't have all the answers, but we are happy to share our experience, and that's what we're here to do today. So we're gonna divide the next hour over four different questions. We're gonna start with the question, what is a quilt worth? How much are my other services worth? Things that aren't necessarily quilting, but quilting adjacent. What are our individual business goals? And then how do we share out our business? So those are the things that we'll be chiming in on round robin panel style. Before we jump into that though, Heidi has a game that she would like to play.
I
Heidi,
sure do.
take it away.
All right, we're doing a new way. I am about to launch a poll. This untitled poll, I forgot I could put a title in, has 6 questions. So go through and just one answer per question. See what you think. Oh my gosh. We're starting out with, what is the most expensive quilt ever sold for?
Heidi, I can't vote. Is that because I'm a host?
Oh, I bet that is. I know I can't vote because I'm sorry. Maybe I shouldn't have made you guys co-hosts.
Yeah,
I can't vote either.
Well, and I'm not sure if that will show up for the recording. So I'm just gonna read that for everybody. It says, the most expensive quilt sold for A, 135 million, or 110 million, or 45 million, or 44 million, or 12 million, or $264,000.
Heidi, I think you might have closed the poll, or somehow somebody might have closed the poll.
I don't think people are able to answer, but y'all can keep it in your head. If you just keep your answer in your head, and then Heidi will reveal the answer, and it'll be like she's reading your mind.
Okay, share the you guys see results now? I don't think anybody participated here. Oh my goodness.
It
I'll
looks
try and
live
launch
now.
it again.
Yeah, launch again.
I think it's shared though.
Right now I'm seeing share results.
Yeah. Okay, well, stop sharing.
Yeah, thanks for, keep telling us in the chat how it's working for you. I see you can see it now.
Huh.
Has anyone tried to click? Oh, it says mine's still up, but that doesn't necessarily help.
I voted the first 2, then it disappeared.
Oh. Gosh, I don't think I really touched anything. Okay. Can
we give us a readout? Basically, yeah, people can keep it in their brains, and then you can answer it quickly, Heidi, so we can get on.
Okay.
And it should be, it's live again now, Heidi. It's live again. People can answer as you read.
Yeah. You can see the quiz again.
Yes.
I just did it for you.
Oh, okay, thank you.
All right.
So I did kind of look this up. I just Googled this before our talk a few days ago, and I thought that was pretty interesting. The most expensive quilt ever sold. And I thought it was interesting that a historian was like pretty much certain that the album quilt is the most elite type quilt on the antique markets. And I was like, really? I've never made an album quilt. Maybe that's something I should try.
That's really interesting. Yeah, as people are doing the poll, we can share that the most expensive quilt ever is called the Reconciliation Quilt, and it's a post-Civil War quilt, and it is in that Baltimore album style. So
Maura and I know
amazing you were looking that up too.
Yeah, we're gonna start making our album quilts right after we get off the call.
We need that money. The album quilt is where each block is a different design style or a variation of blocks. So you could, take 12 blocks and make them each a separate quilt block and then put them together as one quilt top. Someone was asking the album quilt.
But they're often appliqued, correct?
Yes, they're often appliqued. They can not be and still be included as an album quilt. I think when it's just the variety, each block is different in the quilt.
I mean, think of like a photo album where there's just the album of different, it's like a scrapbook of scrap.
Yeah. Like Harriet Power's Bible quilt and the other quilt of hers, those are album quilts as well. So I feel like some of my quilts are album quilts without the like storytelling quilts. That makes sense that would be a particularly expensive kind of quilt because it lands it in history and
and to the value of a quilt for historians, like on Antique Roadshow, if you're watching those, it's usually, it has to do with time and attention.
What you know about the cost of, what do you think all that costs?
Who's that?
Yeah, please make sure you're on mute. I'll take a look and see who's unmuted.
Yeah. I mean, hell, you talk about just two little, there's two.
Everybody's muted. Sorry for the interruption, folks.
I'm going to reveal the answers to our poll. So anyways, all the same answers were through there. So just figuring out which type of art sold for which amount. So the Reconciliation Quilt was the $200,000 quilt. And then, most expensive work of art ever was a Gustav Klimt painting sold after he passed away. And then living artist. I did not copy all of the details of who did what, but Georgia O'Keeffe is our most expensive female artist, and then living female artist we dropped right down. I don't remember. I think I wasn't familiar with who that artist was. It was an artist, I didn't know her name, which kind of surprised me that I wasn't on top of that. So last week we were talking a little bit about how, yes, of course, there are paintings that sell for $100, same as there are quilts that sell for $100. And so we're not talking about the base price, but where can a quilt go is a good question. And I wasn't able to even find out really where, like, the most expensive quilt from a living artist, that doesn't seem to be something that is cataloged in that way and easily searchable. No, that was not the most expensive living artist, I think. It was in my email that I sent to the team, but I don't know.
We can include the details in the follow-up email, Heidi. Why don't we do that?
Oh, that's a wonderful idea. Yeah, Jasper Johns was the most expensive living artist, and then Jenny Seville was the most expensive living female artist at auction from 2018. As well as the most expensive textile was the Imperial Embroidered Thangka. So it was an Asian art textile that was embroidered.
Okay, but your point still stands. Overall, the trends that we're seeing, Heidi, is that women's work, and especially quilts, are economically undervalued compared to other art forms and work done by men.
Yeah. So it's just an interesting statistic, interesting to be able to see, and especially for our beloved quilts. But so if I could sell a quilt for $200,000, I sure would be happy.
Yeah. Why don't we jump on in with our first question, and anybody can start, doesn't matter who, but our first question is, what is a quilt worth? And we're not talking about what's it worth on the inside. We're talking about what's it worth bottom dollar line. There's so many ways to think about this question, and we can start with whoever would like to start.
I mean, I'm happy to jump right in. I've got plenty of diatribes about it. The thing that from a consultation standpoint, people ask me this all the time, just artists, also quilters, also whatever. And I don't think the answer is necessarily different, except as a quilter, you have to do more work to kind of get it into people's brains. You have to explain why quilts are valuable, but the value of something, as we all know from the world, Beanie Babies to Bitcoin, it's as much as somebody's willing to pay for it, right? Like that's the kind of economy answer. And then your job as an artist is to prove that. Why does this poll keep popping up?
Oh, so I'm sharing the results. The results just popped in. It looks like we weren't going to get results, but we did. And people answered with a whole big mix, which is real interesting. So, yeah.
So anyway, so the value of something is kind of, talking about it's how much someone's willing to pay for it, right? Yeah. Like that's the bottom of it. Like that's truly it. Now that's true, except for there is also the sort of linear time. Something is as valuable as someone's willing to pay for it, and they choose that amount based on what you've sold for in the past or what they think they can sell it for in the future. If you're talking about pure sort of investment, inherent value of object, now then you start to talk about sort of narrative value, people buying it for their experience, and that changes the value. Unfortunately, it actually brings it almost down a lot. I mean, I think that if you're buying something for investment, you're looking at how much it had sold for and what you can sell it for. But if you're buying it for your own experience, you look at your own kind of money you're willing to give away for it. And that changes the way the kind of mental algorithm goes as far as choosing a value for something. And I think we'll talk a little bit later about how we price something, which is very different than the value of something. And hopefully the goal is to get those to be the same, but often they are way, way skewed. Maybe you're pricing it for $265,000 and it's your second quilt you've ever made, which doesn't mean it's not worth that to you, but it may not mean you can sell it for that. Vice versa. Maybe your 1,000th quilt that you put up in the MoMA and you're selling it for $100. So the goal is kind of to hit here, but we'll talk a bit about pricing and we're talking value first.
Well, and value is part of like point number one, right? We're not getting to that with one of our other topics, are we, Zach? Yeah. I would be happy to share from kind of the like backwards thinking way that I figure out how to price a quilt. I generally think about like, what would I want to make per year? Or at least what's like the least amount of money per year would I like to be my salary as a quilter? And so especially when I was first starting out, I had made more than this as a teacher, but I figured I was changing jobs, so choose a smaller amount. So I chose $40,000 a year as something, as a goal to be making with the quilts that I sell. And now I don't only make money by selling quilts, so I do other things, but then my time goes to that and I'm not putting 40 hours a week. That's kind of a joke though. I spend way more than 40 hours a week working. But anyways, I thought if I were to make that amount of money per year as a quilter, then what's an hour worth? And then what else goes into a quilt? Do I need to account for anything other than hours? And I kind of felt like the materials are so affordable. I wasn't even going to bother calculating what I spent on batting and stuff because it was, didn't feel significant. And so that's how I arrived at pricing my quilts. And when I was first making them, I used a special app to track the hours, but it was really hard to remember to pause it when I got up to go make lunch and then remember to come. So some of the quilts that would say it took 200 hours because I forgot to pause the timer. But initially it was so hard for me to wrap my brain around knowing how long something cost. I started that way. And then once I had that idea of what do I want to make per hour based on a yearly rate, and then how long does it take to make a quilt, I was able to move into more standardized pricing. And I figure that's how I give myself a raise, because as I continue, I get faster and more efficient at making quilts. And I like the idea that I really gleaned from the art world, and especially from my friend Shane, who's a painter here in Wisconsin, who was sharing that most of the time things are sold at a regular price. So I don't say, oh, this one is an extra $25 because of the time I spent, but instead a quilt made in this way, in this size, is around $3,000. A quilt made in this way, in this side, is around $6,000. And that's how that shakes out too. And that would be retail versus wholesale, which I think is a really important thing to notice, because if someone's helping to sell my quilt, they're usually getting 50% of the money. Occasionally they get 40 or 25%, but usually then I have to do more of the work in terms of getting people there, finding out about the work. So I'm finding my hourly rate that I want to get, and then I have to double the price of the quilt for that wholesale retail situation. Zach.
So just to piggyback on that, because I was going to touch on a similar idea.
Mm-hmm.
I ran across about a year ago a really wonderful formula, and we can maybe put this in the thank you email too, that speaks to what you're talking about, but really breaks it down in a way that I was able to think about it. And so it's how much do I want to make per year? But then you got to think about how many weeks out of that year am I actually going to work? You're not going to work 52 weeks.
Totally.
Right? So you can't divide it by 52. How many hours each week are you going to work? Right? You're not going to work 24 hours a day. So you got to think about those kinds of things, and then you get your number. And then similar to you, then I began just kind of grouping like items to like items, having kind of category prices. But we'll include that formula because it's really helpful for me in the beginning to think about.
I think it's also important to look, like do that internally, but then look around and see what are the prices of other quilts. Because if I'm arriving at a number from what I want my yearly salary to be and all of that, and then comparing with other artists and what people are selling things for. And if I can find someone who I think is making work that's comparable to me or similar and walking around, that is important information to know. Doesn't have to guide every decision, but it is helpful. Maura, I love, I always remember when we were in Savannah, Georgia, talking about pricing quilts and one of the stories that you shared with me, but I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Well, go ahead, Luke. What were you gonna?
I was just going to say that there's a really difficult elephant in the room when it comes to pricing quilts based on your worth, which is really valid. And that's what the market will bear. You know, the quilts at Target go for $100. So me trying to explain to someone why the decimal point is 2 points to the right, is sometimes a difficult sell. And so it's important to do that work to figure out how you need to get paid so that you can feed yourself and put your lights on. But you also often can't do that day one because you have to prove the value of the object to the people who will buy it. And that's the work of art, right? Like if you are a plumber, there is a value for an hour of plumber that everyone kind of agrees on. And maybe you have the buddy who's a plumber who gives you a discount. And maybe you have the midnight plumber who's more because they have to, you know, there's that kind of wiggle room. But like in the world of art, they're all fake numbers in a lot outside of the cost of the materials, which kind of negligible in terms of their hundreds of dollars, not thousands, which they ought to be, you know, in terms of buying of the object. The cost goes from 100 to 100,000, and that number is just on who will buy it, why they'll buy it, who your friends are, where you were born, and if you have more followers. So those numbers aren't at all relating to your human experience of needing to buy food, which is really unfortunate. But your rubric for pricing is wonderful, but it's really hard to just sort of shove that in the beginning. There's a lot of work to be done, and like you said, check who's selling what, where, and how. And, you know, you can see who, what, where, and when, that you can kind of do those things. You know, I started out very differently, but I'll talk about that in a minute more. I didn't mean to talk on.
I want to hear how you.
I want to hear, yeah.
Okay, but I'll say, because I'm dancing in that world that you're speaking of right now, and where I've grown into that, but I did not start out figuring out an income of any sorts. I started out like with pure grit and adrenaline of like, I'm gonna ditch my job and just like not even think ahead, just like I want to do what I want to do with my time, and I want to work passionately. But I came from farming. Well, I went to art school, and then I found my passion to get up in the morning after the sun, you know, that Sunday night feeling where you're like, I don't want to go to work Monday morning. My whole pursuit after college was finding what got me jumping out of bed on Monday morning with just like love and passion. And I found farming to be that. And it didn't matter how much I got paid. It just felt good. I felt connected. I felt whole. And after a while, I did feel like dried out and wanted to return to my creative background. and pairing that with natural dyes, growing, and then quilting. So when I started out quilting, I remember my conversation with my mom was the first person I told what I was going to do. And I said, I'm going to make a series of small crib size quilts. You could call them baby quilts or wall hangings, whatever. I didn't know what to say, but they were going to be small and bite size. And I was going to sell them for $500 each. Mm-hmm. And I think the lesson I learned is not to listen to people's feedback when you're telling them your dream.
Yeah, me too.
Because as I'm a mom, I'm going to make the same mistake. But she was like, oh, interesting. It sounds like you're targeting a rich clientele that has a lot of money to spend on baby quilts, or in some way or form. She said that. And I was like, no, I was so offended. I'm not, my clients aren't just rich. My clients are going to value handmade work. My clients are going to value who I am. My clients are going to spend, save, and invest. They're not just like, you know, have that money extra. Sometimes they like wait to, you know, get the money. And I went on and I had a hard time selling them for $500, but I just kept going. And 3 months later, I connected through social media. That's some people's questions are, how do you market and all that? And it was Twitter for me that was my breakthrough. And I connected with Levi's as the partnership was my first like real income to the quilt business that I was starting. And I sold myself so short because I did a collection of 10 quilts to get started and I sold them for retail. That's the thing, retail, wholesale, retail, they were selling for $950. I was only making like $500. And I was like, good, this is great. Like I said, I wanted to make $500 a quilt, but they were 4 times the size. They were like 60 inches by 60 inches. This is the story I want to tell today because it's a learning curve. The accountant for Levi's on her last day, because she left to join a startup, you know, San Francisco stuff, she emailed me. She made time on her last day to sit and email me. And she said, dear Maura, you are not pricing your work high enough. Also, she bought a quilt for her friend and her mom at my retail price that was for Levi's, $950. She said, I love your work. It's so valuable. And I want to encourage you to raise your prices and look around in the market. Although there's not a lot of naturally dyed hand quilted quilts, you might want to check out Swan's Island's blankets in Maine. They're comparable. And I was like, go, good, market research. Didn't think of that. And I looked and they were selling their woven, hand woven blankets, naturally dyed yarns for around $4,000. And I said, okay, sounds good to me. I'm going to make my next quilt and sell it for $4,000. And I did. And she asked me between that time, you know, what does it mean for you to be an artist? And I was like, I think the most important thing it means is just to have a voice and to be alive and to participate. And like that passion was still all that I was after. It wasn't after the money. And lo and behold, Meredith raised my prices like a lot and bought my first expensive quilt. She was the person that gave me permission, but anything can give you permission. You can give your own self permission to do that. It just was very literal in my case. And I mean, I think that there was a little struggle there. And I look back at those quilts that I like made for Levi's, and there was some great, great work that just got, you know, sold for very low prices, but it also got my momentum going. It's not all for nothing. So sometimes as it goes, the money we sell it for, it creates like that promotional value is hard to equate. And, you know, I can kind of wrap it, we can go from there, but I don't need to keep talking about that. But
that's such a great story of how you first started out pricing though.
Yeah.
Luke, what was on the tip of your
tongue
about your beginning?
Well, Luke said before last talk, which got this kicked off, is something I was told early on is you should never lower your prices, like discounting your work. For people who are investing in your work, collectors of your work, they're not wanting you to devalue your work. They wanting the value of your work to increase. And that stuck with me. I mean, my husband Chap has been kind of a guiding voice. He's reads every business bio. He's a business guy. And we chit chat, and he always kind of has those concrete truths about business. And I've always heard that, even when I was just running off of adrenaline, I always understood like pricing work was never going down. Mm-hmm. So I always started low, kind of increasing, because I wanted to get to that point. And I think that I wanted to mention that because Luke said it last time. I want it to be in this talk too, that there's no discounts or sales. It's an artist. It's also fine art and studio production are different. And I'm working in the world of the fine art, one of a kind, like a painting. Collectors, my clients of mine collect, sometimes buy a few. And the most expensive quilt, I'm just going to throw it out there because I think it's fun, was I sold it for $12,000. And the person who bought it is it's his personal person. I'm not mentioning their name, but they spent more on framing, I'm pretty sure, that they did on the quilt. It was like put into some shadow box, like glass acrylic shadow box in their living room. And I'm like, that was not cheap to do that. So could have been a $12,000 frame for a $12,000 quilt. Who knows?
Well, so Zach, I would love to, I know you're sitting there quiet. I'm happy to jump in and tell something about me, but if you've got stuff to say, my dude, I'm happy to. All right.
I'll bring it back, but you start.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so, Zach and Heidi were talking about sort of starting with how much you needed to keep your lights on and going from there to your work. So to clarify the sort of, in case anyone doesn't know, the difference between sort of fine art and studio art is just producing one-off items and producing a type of item that you make a lot of. Now, that doesn't mean the type of item that there's a exact reproduction every time. Sometimes it does. Sometimes you made the same exact thing, you make 1,000 of them. Sometimes you make a variation of something and you make 1,000 of them, versus sort of the studio art side is you make one thing and you sell that thing, and then you make another thing. It's just, they're different objects. So that distinction is important as people kind of work on pricing. I think studio art has a little bit of the sort of studio practice where you're making multiples has a bit more of an algorithm sense, where you can say, I'm going to sell this many a year. I have a history of selling this many. I could price them for this. But if you're making one-off items, it's different in a little bit. So for me, I actually started by saying, here is how much I want people to value my item, and I actually don't expect them to buy it. So my first prices were, $7,000 to $10,000, everything that I made. And it's embarrassing looking back on the object itself, because my skill set wasn't to the point where it ought to be that valuable in terms of my own, ego of the object. But the people who paid attention to it because of that price were the people that ultimately bought it when it got to be 16. It took me 4 or 5 years to work on a museum to buy an object. But if they started seeing it and it was 8 to 10, they said, oh, this value means that he's interesting. And then they said, oh gosh, now it's 12, 14, 16. We'll buy it now, because then it'll be 50 next time we look, and we're investing. So for me, rather than, and I was living in a garage, I was working on the house for some friends in exchange for rent. I mean, I had, food stamps to eat. But I was pricing them at $10,000, not because I wanted to sell them, well, because I wanted to sell them for that, not because I expected to sell them for that, but because that's the value I wanted implicit in the object, so that in 5-10 years, they would be selling for that regularly. And so it's just a fully different rubric for pricing the object. I was also willing to do other things to feed myself. And it's also a different mentality, right? Like, I would rather get a job and not have to sell quilts that become a chore. If they're not selling for that much, they're still going to be that much. I'm going to go bag groceries. That's fine. And for me, that worked out really well. I don't sell that many, but they sell for a value that I'm interested in selling for. And those relationships take years and years to cultivate. And again, that was about perceived value. A value I think is there, but again, I'm creating a value through the history of my career, and I'm starting halfway up the ladder as opposed to going rung by rung. And that was a choice that, you know, I'm very fortunate to have worked out. And that certainly there's big gaps where it doesn't. You know, I could, yeah, another thing I'll talk about later, just in terms of trying to price things that people I know can buy. That's a whole nother part of it. Like actually wanting people to own the objects as opposed to the implicit value of kind of legacy objects. It's just a whole nother thing. But I will say, just to my first thing, just to throw out there, is that my starting price was about value in the kind of art world, and sort of proving me as a maker by making them expensive, more than they were worth. I'll admit it now down the road, like they aren't worth that. I don't know who is this kid? Get out of architecture school, make some quilts with your face on it, try to sell them for $10,000. Like, get out of here. I didn't, but it helped me get to where I am now. And that was very valuable, and also just worth saying.
Mm-hmm. I think, you know, there's something really special about your first few quilts also, which is interesting. And I also, you know, another thing I like to keep in the back of my mind is, will it hurt to let go of this quilt for that amount of money? Because at the end of the day, if you have that regret that you sold it, that it's not still yours, that you can't still look at it for that amount, like that's one of those pulse checks before you put it out there. And I love that you were valuing your first pieces like that. Zach, over to you.
Yeah. Yeah, you know, folks, I'm living the question, you know, and I realize that I'm relatively new to the I gotta live off my quilts game. Taught for 18 years in public schools, if you didn't know that, just quit last month. Here I am, full-time textiles. I guess my question for myself goes back to, who am I making my quilts for? And Luke, you just mentioned, you know, you want your peers, the folks that you know, to be able to own your quilts. And Heidi, I know at one point in time in another conversation, you and I have joked about how we can't even afford our own quilts sometimes, you know? And I don't know. So I guess the question I'm living with daily is, how do I preserve the value and the worth of my quilt, but also keep it accessible to people who need that quilt in their life? And maybe I'm also coming from a bent here of thinking about how most of my commissions I take are memory quilt commissions, memory quilts, burial quilts, and funeral quilts. So they're tied to a larger picture around grief or loss or healing, different things. And I want people that want those quilts to be able to access them, to have access. And so I don't know what I'll be doing a year from now. I can tell you some of the things that I'm experimenting with at the moment are when someone comes to me and asks for a memory quilt, I'll say, okay, you know, we talk all about it. They share their stories about, you know, who we're making this quilt for. I said, okay, based on similar quilts I've made, I can estimate that would take about 40 hours of work. And I say, I would like you to think about what 40 hours of work is worth to you, and then get back to me. You know, so usually it's on the phone we're talking, right? And then I pose that question. I say, but I want you to think about it, and I want you to come back to me, and we'll go from there. And those numbers, I've only done that a handful of times, have been wildly across the board. So I don't know if that's a sustainable model. But what I like about it is that it couches the worth, the economic worth of a quilt in labor. And it's like me trading my 40 hours of labor for your 40 hours of labor. You know, yeah. That's one model that I'm working with. Another model that I also have experimented with is giving people a range of prices. So, you know, based on similar quilts, I would like to make $1,500 for this quilt. But, you know, I would accept anything in this range, maybe go down to $1,200 up to $1,800 or something like that, and let them pick their range that way. That feels workable in a way that it gives people some agency in the pricing, but it still already prices out a lot of folks. So I don't know. I'm sitting, I feel like I'm rambling a little bit because this is the question, like I say, that I'm living with, and I have no answers. I just have ideas that I'm trying. And I would love to hear how y'all think about making your work accessible to the extent that you can.
I mean, I have a little bit of input on it just now, and Maura, I didn't mean to cut you off as you're talking, but like, I can't sell them for, so I've been trying the last couple of years to sell works for $500 to $1,500 because that's a value that people can buy. It is significantly less than the works that go to museums, that go to collections, because I want people that I know to buy them. I can't sell them. I can't do it. I can sell $5,000 quilts, $10,000 quilts. I cannot sell $1,500 quilts. It just doesn't work. There's a weird, I think that there's a, gosh, I mean, like you're talking about, you know, you're pricing out people at 800. I think there is a different mentality of buying for people with discretionary money versus sort of us. $800 is not out of my budget, but it is a number that I would go, what the fuck? If somebody said it was that cost, right? And so like, if I had an implicit understanding that I could afford it over time, you know, I'm at the point that I am, you know, blah, blah, blah. $800 is not so easy, but I could manage it, right? Like I could get there saving, you know, not eating at, you know, whatever, fogo de chao every night of the week. So, you know, I could get to 800. So there's this sort of education. It's not an education in the sense that there's sort of naivete, but explaining to people of all income ranges that they can put smaller parts aside. Like someone who makes enough money that they don't have to worry about rent and cost of their car is much easier to give themselves permission to spend the extra than somebody who's a little bit more tight budget. But I think $800 is very affordable for anybody. It just might take a year to do. It might take 2 years to do, but that doesn't mean it's not worth $800. And that's one of the things that I'm really knocking my head against, is trying to explain to my peer group that $1,500 isn't a deal breaker if it's the value to you that I think it should be. I want this thing to make your life a better experience. I want you to love it, use it, own it, give it to your kids. This is to make your life better. $1,500 is not too small to enjoy your life more. It is too small for a wallpaper, for something you buy from Target that's going to fall apart. Like, you know, so there's an education level with kind of the lower costed things that I think is, well, also the other, but that I think is really interesting, Zach. You know, that's kind of one thing that we were talking about a little bit as far as the pricing goes. It's harder to sell to our peer group because money thoughts are just very different, for what it's worth.
I appreciate that. Oh, go ahead, Heidi.
Oh, yeah. There was a good comment in the chat recently that was mentioning like handbags. And I feel like that also is the kind of pulse check that I like to do with quilts as well. You know, like looking at what does my quilt cost compared to a Gucci handbag. Like nobody needs that kind of handbag, but they're choosing that, and they clearly have the discretionary funds to spend lots of money on things like that. And I feel like if my quilts are landing at that same price point, that's also interesting to remember and keep track of. And yeah, Maura.
That place you're coming from, Zach, where you're holding that question, I'm finding myself there because my time has become more valuable. I have less free time as a mom to young children now. The question or statement that Luke made last time on how much is your quilt worth selling for you, like personally, how much do you feel okay? It is more, I'm asking myself more that than like the business strategy of it in the past of I wanted them to sell at a high enough price I felt okay with, and that I could build my income so I can invest in my business, you know, growth mindset. My mindset's changing. It's more sentimental. I'm thinking more of my legacy. I'm thinking more of my family, my children, my mom and sister who direly want me to make them a quilt. I'm thinking maybe that's more valuable than money some days. You know, it's a lot of questions I'm holding and I don't have answers to. I'm just evaluating them in my heart and my mind. How am I feeling? But where it kind of connects to the business is that's who I am. Where I started from authentically is passion and love and making, and that storytelling, whether I knew it or not, I was told by other people watching and audience that I was selling these quilts because I was sharing my story. And I think that's what anyone's doing when they're making work. And it's a responsibility I learned to take, which was the responsibility of selling a piece of work for any amount of money is to tell its value and to share the story. And I mean, if you're, doing that, which we all are, but everyone who's watching, just paying attention to all those meaningful small moments of cutting pieces and putting them together. And whether it's in photographs or not, when you're talking to someone who's interested in your work, you might not be realizing you're selling your work, but you're telling your story, and they surprise you, and they're the people that buy your work. It's the people that want to get to know you, that want a piece of you almost. It's an aspirational purpose to consume the work and have it, is because they want to share that story with the people close to them who come into their homes and their spaces. So it's what I've learned about the work from here, but I'm still sitting with questions.
I will say, as you look at kind of the capital A art market, you hear a lot of stories that, exactly like you said, narrative sells art, right? Yeah. I mean, there's this sort of prominent sculptor had this huge palatial studio, all of his works are 10 stories high, or 30 feet high with tall big metal sculptures, and he would have collectors come by, and he's like, oh well, that one on the hill is my favorite one. I don't think I could sell it because I love it so much, but I guess you guys could maybe buy it. I guess maybe if you love it as much as I do. And like he would just turn the ones on that corner every time, because that was his sort of narrative. And that's maybe not the most ethical, but just as a story of kind of how narrative really gets people into your experience. And Maura, Zach, Heidi, you guys are so good at the objects you make reflecting your experience. Zach, your burial quilts, your memory quilts are you talking with someone through an experience. You're giving them back their own narrative, and like that's priceless, right? I mean, that's amazing and beautiful. Yeah, I think a narrative is really important to think about. If you are just trying to sell something, I mean, like for me, I had to build up enough narrative that people were willing to buy an object. Say it's a museum, they have to know I'm going to make more. That narrative is really simple, but to somebody who wants to buy it because they love it, that narrative is very much about cultivating that love. And I think those are all really important parts. And whether it's just pure kind of analytical business, I've created a narrative of value, and this value will go up over time, therefore give me this money. Or if the narrative is like, hey, you love it, like touch this fabric, feel it, smell it. This is made out of acorns. This is made out of dandelions. Like, what does that mean? You love a dandelion, like feel it, have a picnic. And so all of these kind of things are all implicit in in selling the object to the people who buy it, because that's what they want. Like quilts are quilts. If you just want to get warmer, go buy something from Goodwill. Do it. Go buy a quilt that's been loved. I mean, use a secondhand one. Maybe I'm not saying buying it from Target, but if you just need to be warmer and you don't care about the texture or the feeling or the intention or the material, buy it from Goodwill. But if you want something that's more, and that's our job, is to explain why that more is worth the money. Why do you want it to be a beautiful experience every time you crawl into bed or see it on the wall, or understand it, smell it, use it, picnic, give it to your friends, gifts, whatever. I think that's so important, Maura. I'm glad you touched on that.
Mm-hmm. I think now could be a good moment as well to toggle over to question number 2 about the value of our other services. For me, I have not, I mean, I've made some smaller quilts to consider how can I make something that's an accessible price point. Like a little 6-inch quilt or a small vase is not the same as one of my giant quilts. And so those are, I think, like prices that I could afford. If I wanted to buy one, if I wanted to give one as a Christmas present, I totally could. And so that kind of scaling down. But generally, the main place where I feel like I am making things affordable at every price point is in my other services. So teaching or lectures or that kind of distribution. I know a lot of us have been if you're in a magazine, you can have a printed magazine photo of that quilt instead of the actual physical quilt. And that's a pretty affordable price point. I think most people can afford to buy a magazine. As well as for teaching for me, I think for all of us doing these free conversations and putting more things on YouTube and Instagram and other accessible platforms, Zach, with your really affordable pricing for Patreon, allowing people to get in there, that those free and ultra affordable things help balance out then other rates. We get asked all the time about our guild rates for a lecture, for a workshop. And then if we're not doing like a guild rate workshop, what does the workshop sell? And what is the split financially with the host for that space? I also do one-on-one consultations, and I don't advertise those a ton because they don't pay as well. That's kind of like my gift, is offering one-on-one consultations. If you want to learn from me privately for an hour, you can. And I've had that at a sliding scale rate. And I thought a lot about, when I raised my rates a while back, what is an hour of private time worth with someone else? And I was especially made to pause and think when someone posed to me, well, what do you pay for a massage with someone? And I was like, oh, more than what I've been charging for an hour with me. And I thought maybe I'm at least worth the same as what the massage therapist is worth on that per hour rate. But, an hour lecture with me is partly that price, because I look around and see what do other people charge and how much is that and what's the value. And also it's being distributed by a large audience. So if you have 100 people attending, then it doesn't really cost so much per person, or a lot of times a space is charging that. And it's funny because here we're giving a similar hour for free, sometimes also with a prepared PowerPoint presentation. But what are the things that I will and won't talk about in a free space versus a paid space like that? There's a different energy that I bring to a paid lecture that is very different from the informal and conversational quality of what we're doing. But that for me is the space where I'm thinking about how am I making things accessible to everyone. Not everyone can afford to go on a retreat like what I just did recently in Madeline Island, but everyone can afford to log onto YouTube and watch an advertisement. So that's the space where I make things accessible. And then I don't feel bad for charging what a quilt is worth or what I think it should be working up to being worth. On the market.
Just to tie these three questions in, the sort of last three are, how much are other services worth? What are our business goals, and how do we share our business? There's so much. So again, the practice of being an artist is nebulous at best, right? You're not a plumber where you had to get certified. They tell you this is how much per hour and this is what a wrench does. Have a good life. In our world, like for me, I want to sell quilts that I've made. And does that mean that sometimes I teach and give lectures for less than I want to? Will I travel the world doing exhibitions that they barely pay me for? All day, yes, because it'll allow me to share the work that I've made. That's my goal, is sharing the work that I've made in my own room, about sort of, mine's about innovation and sharing that innovation. That's my sort of tagline, and that's what's important. Other people are very, very different. Like Zach has an amazing quality of engaging humans that I just could never access, right? So his communities are rich and beautiful. Like, go join his everything. It's amazing. But so like his qualities that he brings are so communal and rich, that kind of richness there that is very different in some ways. So his idea of getting these like $5 access to some of these amazing things that he's done is free. Like that's free in all ways. So do that. But like, and for me, it's very different. I'll do that all for free because I hope you buy the $10,000 quilt in a decade, and there's just different ways of thinking about how you garner your audience, because what the biggest important thing that you're making and how to get it out there. Again, for me, I want to show and talk about the things I've made, love to sell them. So I'll do free lectures, classes, less than I would prefer to get, because ultimately my goal is to share the work that I've made. And again, everyone has very different systems. So to think about business practice, really you have to define what your priorities are in either making, sharing, telling, encouraging. Some people just like to teach because they're making the world better at what they do. And like, I want everyone to be better, but I don't necessarily want to do that work for them. I want to encourage them to push themselves to do it, not me tell them how to be, I'm not going to tell everyone how to do a thing better. I want to tell you how to push yourself to do a thing better. And anyway, that's just different. But I think it's all about really what it is that you want to put into the world and figuring out how to get paid for that. And maybe that means doing a lot of other ancillary things that point people towards that thing. I can't sell quilts for $10,000 all the time. But the more people who see the work and see the price tag, the more chances are that the person with that checkbook can do it. So, so my goal is now larger audience and that kind of a thing. So that does the work that I'm trying to do in different ways. So kind of as Heidi was talking about, all these other services are great. And maybe that's the way you pay for everything, because you just want to make, you don't care if you sell the things you make ever, put them in a closet, but now you have to teach so that you're making money to make things that who cares if you ever sell them. And again, that's just to kind of put that out there, that as you're developing a business plan, what's the priority? What can you do to do that priority more hours in a day?
Yeah, I think if if you really need to sell a quilt to pay your bills, then you have to sell it way less than what you would want to sell it for. And you can't be raising prices in that way.
I regret a few.
Mm-hmm.
Money comes and money goes so fast, and you're like, damn it.
Mm-hmm.
That sold too quick. Should priced it higher.
Yeah.
That's how you learn.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's those ones that hurt that like teach you that lesson.
Yeah.
One of the things that I've been thinking a lot about lately is, and I didn't expect this when I started the Patreon community, which by the way has already gotten like so big, like we've outgrown Patreon. So actually this week we moved to a new space called the Quilty Nook, and I see many Quilty Nookers out there. So thank you for being here. But I've started thinking about it in a way that they're not only like supporting me as a full-time artist, but to circle back to the question I'm living with, they're also subsidizing in a way these memory quilts I'm making for families that can't afford it, right? These burial quilts for families that can't afford it. And so I'm trying to not think so much about like one particular quilt and how much I'm charging for this one particular quilt, but how can I put this pie together of different income sources so that I get what I need, you get what you need, and we all have things in abundance, I don't know how that's going to look in a year. Like I said, I'm kind of new to this, like really like having to live on it, live on that salary, to live on that income. But that's how I'm thinking about it at the moment.
What becomes too big for Patreon? What's like the numbers there?
So we started in June and we're already at 300 patrons, which is awesome. Mm-hmm. The thing was though, the vision I had was a very community-centered vision. Like I wanted people to come together to be able to connect and engage with one another about the creative practice. And Patreon's just not that platform. Mm-hmm. Love them because they, people are familiar with them and they know the name that has like brand recognition or whatever. But Patreon's really good for like one-way connection to an audience. It's good for me to put out my knowledge to the audience. But that was unsatisfying for me. And what I want is engagement. What I want is not just me talking to you, but you talking to me and you talking to somebody else over there. And that's what's been happening this week. And that's what's been so cool to see. So, and we'll put a link into the thank you email for that if folks are interested in learning more.
Yeah, I'm just to give another shout out to Zach. It's so amazing, the community, the giving and sort of cycle of conversation that the cyclone of conversation that you're creating, I think is really wonderful. And that speaks to his qualities as a maker and his business practice, which is different than the rest of ours in just a very different way. So his business can be accessed for, $15, $5 a month, and just being a part of a community. And that's amazing, and it's different and wonderful. And it's cool because we all have such different skill sets to bring to the table.
I feel you on that, Zach. I have, I'm not in the season of life for it, but business goal wise, as far as that question goes, I've had it before kids, but now it's still like there in the future is, something happened when a few people from social work backgrounds came to take workshops from me that were expensive workshops, small groups in my home, couple days long, food, all of it, really intimate. And they were coming from like a halfway house for women and children in Houston, a center for vision and hearing impaired people. And to think that they spent that time and money to come and learn so they could bring it back to their community kind of struck me in a way. It just sort of shifted my course of thinking of what if I went to them, because I don't know if I prepared them enough in 3 days to do what they're going to do, to like open that door up. So that's one of the ways I started doing video class. Is I've only done one video class, but it's a full one. And the reason was not just passive income, that helps sustain it, but because people who have disabilities can't go, and people who don't have a lot of money can't go. And that's what you're preaching, Zach. And I mean, every time you speak about it, my heart gets like just pumping. And I was thinking a goal for me in life is if I could just donate my time to places, centers where people maybe just need a light turned on for them, and like how to take scraps of fabric and make something and put it to use. It's exciting to think, the whole pursuit of happiness of like doing good deeds for others makes you feel good too. Is it for yourself or is it for them? All of it. It's just like a whole,
it's for everybody.
Symbiotic relationship. And I think like the long term is like, I want to do things for pleasure and happiness for me, for others,
And more, I couldn't agree more. Heidi, you posed a question early on our brainstorming about what are our business goals. And so in preparation for our chat today, I was typing out a few ideas. And number one, and I put this in quotes because it's such a big idea, is I just want the good life, right? Like, what is the good life? And you've all echoed the same idea in your own words in various ways. But I think it's so important to start there. And for me, part of the good life more is what you're saying is having the capability to be generous enough to donate time for free, to gift time, to gift quilts, to gift things. And so then if that's what I want, and part of that dream also is, a little house down south and like being closer to my family and sewing all day, that's all part of the good life for me. If that's what I want, okay, so then how do I structure everything income-wise to support that vision and that dream?
Yes.
Yeah, so how do you?
Well, that's the conversation in the last hour. What if we folks were to do a quick round robin with this last question about how do we get the word out about what we're doing? What do we find to be the most effective strategies? And then we can have some closing comments if folks still have some last thoughts they haven't been able to share yet.
You go, Zach.
I will say that I'll cite the obvious so y'all can cite the good ones. Instagram, like it is a connector like no other for a visual artist. I try to, as my personal formula, I'm a person who likes routines. I think it's the Virgo side of me. So my personal routine is I post one post a day, Monday through Friday, because now this is my job. Like I'm doing it, like trying to put some structures around it. So Monday through Friday, one post a day, usually mid-afternoon, because that's when I see the most folks are on. And then I do stories. And y'all might have seen in the last couple of weeks, I've started doing these little morning videos where they're just whatever. They're just like me waking up and puffy-eyed and bedhead and all that. But it's me sharing what I'm working on that day. And I do that for a couple of reasons. One is to share, but two is it's a little bit of accountability on my part to feel like I'm not working in a vacuum or isolation, that, maybe somebody out there wants to know if I got the color just right for those little egg seed pods that I'm hand appliquing to my mandala quilt right here, So I think a post a day and a story in the morning has been my Instagram formula. It's been working very well. And on that note, I would also just say that I noticed a big shift in my own personal practice with social media at the beginning of the pandemic, because I shifted the focus from my work to my process. And that might be something that's helpful for people to think about, that it's not, I make some pretty things, right? And people like to see pretty things, but I think what we can all tap into is the thoughts we think while we're making and the steps we go through when we're crafting something. And I think sharing those ideas are what can be so powerful. So I think of social media in the terms of not me putting my work first, but myself as a person and as a maker first. So that would be
I'd like to ask you on something that you posted on stories this week. You asked the question to your audience, what does it feel like when you pull thread or hand quilt? Every answer was like so unique, so individual, so poetic. Can you put that somewhere? Because it went away.
Hey, another thing for our thank you email. But I'll say that Heidi and I are working on a workshop. Can I talk about this real fast? Okay, so we can make this public. So Heidi and I are teaming up on a workshop at Madeline Island School of the Arts next June called Sewing in Place. And the whole idea is like being in a place, in a landscape, being influenced by that place and your experience with the place, and sewing that, incorporating that into textiles. And so one of the things that I was thinking of for our workshop was this mindfulness activity dealing with hand sewing. And so I noticed that, you know, when you're doing a mindfulness activity with breathing, it's often suggested that you pay attention to a very particular point of your breath. Maybe there's a little nose hair that moves when you inhale, or maybe it's a coolness on the upper lip, like Heidi mentioned the other day. I noticed that there's a particular part of the stitch, and that's when you're pulling the thread out through the fabric, that gives me a physical felt sensation in my forearm. And I find that if I focus on that physical felt sensation each time, is grounding in a way. It keeps me very present. And so I wanted some language around that, because I felt like, I mean, I know what it felt like for me, but do other people feel this and how they describe it? And some of the ideas more are beautiful, right? Like some people called it like a cat's purr. Some people call it a whisper, rustling through dry leaves. But that's all it. That's what we feel when we pull thread through fabric. And I love that idea. Yeah, I'll post that in the thank you email. What are some of the things y'all do to reach out and share?
And put it on your Instagram. You can save your little stories in a little tab. Put that there so we can find it later if we just need to, tap into our own. Because I'm never going to hand sew in my life, but I would like to hear what other people do when they feel it.
I guess I'll just finish the round robin part because I was sort of in my nest here, but that's exactly what I used to do, Zach. I used to do Monday through Friday. I used to take the weekends off, be with my family. One post a day, super easy, accountable. I don't know. I lose track of social media in a good way. I'm in a really fun season of life right now where I break up with my phone all the time for easy, effortlessly. It's not even like put it in a drawer, lock it away. It's like walk away because I'm being in the world with my children who do not care about phones. And it's sort of like medicine. It's not good for the social media marketing side of my life, business. And I've worried about that here and there, but mostly rest at night, knowing the day was good. I don't need to keep up. It will all come back when I'm ready. But hearing that makes me anxious because I would feel better about my business if I was doing that. But I think as long as I keep focused at being authentic to who I am in my life, where I'm at, being a whole human for the people in my nuclear life, my friends and family, is where good work will come from. So as long as I'm doing that and grounding, even if it's not marketing, I feel the soil is rich. And when I return and my time returns, it will flourish. And on surprising ways, and maybe some structure and boundaries will have to happen eventually, but that's where I'm at. And that's it.
I mean, that's that good life, right?
Oh, that's the good life. I know, the good life, worrying about the business life.
I mean, the
balance.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Heidi, what would you add as far as how you share your business?
I think I have found that I'm my most successful as a businesswoman when I take a step back and I think about the things that I purchase, that I appreciate, that I follow, that I invest in. And so, over the whole course of my career, since I left teaching back in 2014, I've been able to observe myself and see, who pops up in my Instagram feed all the time? Why am I so jazzed about that? What is inspiring me to follow those people? And sometimes I will look and see like who has the most popular quilting account or something. And sometimes it will be just only finished works of art, only like it looks the same as their website page. And I'll think, I would never want to be that. I would never want to follow that. Like, good for them that things are working out. But I don't even feel inspired to press follow on that account, because I'm so interested in the process and the behind the scenes and seeing the person, seeing the quilt halfway made, that I really respond to that. So I thought, well, that's what I want my Instagram feed to be then, is showing my studio or the halfway quilts or the things that are happening and how they're coming together. And so I've also felt like it takes a lot of free content for me to buy something or invest or get a ticket or purchase an item. So I started thinking about that in my way as well, that generosity is actually what breeds success for me and the business model that I want to make. So in putting a lot more free things, there are things that I used to think, oh, that has to only come in a workshop. I can't show that knot or that technique or that way of doing something for free, because that's the moment in a quilting workshop where people shout out and say, the whole workshop was worth that one thing. And I've realized now, actually, if I share that thing publicly on my Instagram, on whatever, that people like that so much. And they think, wow, I want to take a workshop with her because she gave such a good technique. And when I consider the things that I've paid or subscribed to, it's because I feel so grateful for the free content, because I feel like I know what I'm getting as a savvy shopper. So I've been putting a lot more into being in people's living rooms, hanging out for free, being available, letting people get a whole preview of this is exactly what the workshop with me will be like. I did a free Zoom just recently for the quilt along that I'm doing, and we got to work on composition, and it was just free, but we're working on composition. And like, I was in my happy place as a teacher. I was doing exactly what I love to do. That is exactly what you'll get in a workshop with me. And I think by showing that really genuinely, that is what inspires people to climb on board. So that really generous model, I think, is what's been working great for me, and what feels good for me as a model, and it certainly is that vision of me living the good life.
Oh, Heidi, I just want to say your courses are like college level professor. It's amazing. You take people through the whole experience of finding themselves and making art. It's amazing.
Thank you.
And spiraling conversations. Like, I see over on the Quilty Nook, people are talking about your vignettes quilt along. They're using the terms composition, value, appropriation, different things. And I'm like, people are getting a lot out of that.
Oh my God. And it's been so fun to see in my feed. Like, the comments on my posts are just so exciting to read and unpack lately.
That's
Luke,
so
what about you, amigo?
Well, so I just want to say, as always, I'm just sort of filtering this through kind of like my advice hat, which I'm currently wearing. Define business, and then you could talk about this a little bit more intentionally, right? So like for me, I actually have two businesses. One is to sell my art to pay my life, right? Like, I don't need to store all this. I would love to sell it, put it in a museum collection. They'll store it better than I do. So that's one. That's great. That's money. That's, that's sort of legacy. That's my kind of whatever. My second is inspiration, right? Like, I've been doing this by myself for a long time in my studio, and I have had such a richer year this year because I've been teaching classes about pushing people out of their comfort zone and trying new things and inspiring folks, because, like, if I can't sell something to someone, well, and then, because quilters don't buy quilts. We'll say that.
I've bought a few quilts.
Well, I mean, there's certainly exceptions to the rule, but so then it's like, okay, I actually want to inspire this whole community that I'm right in the middle of, a big part of, to do the best versions of their work as they can. My big thing is always like, every work is a stepping stone to be the best work. So and every work is better. And so, my goal is, one of my business is just to inspire the community that I'm a part of, because the more we all make great work, the more I'm inspired back. And so it's a cycle. It's certainly not just me vomiting out things I think are interesting, because that'll slow down real fast. But if I see someone else doing something cool, I get back up. So that's one of my businesses, but that's not money. So I would do that through Instagram, through social media, through teaching classes, through a newsletter. And that's about sort of engaging with a community of people who are interested in hearing from me. They have to click like, they have to sign up for my newsletter and not unsubscribe. And so that's the business there. And it is some about money, because I charge for my classes, not much. That keeps that going. That's kind of a really lovely way for me to keep my lights on, but it's also a nice way to kind of cultivate this inspiration and sort of this inspiration cycle. But then the other business of selling high-end art objects, they're not going to find you through Instagram. No one's going to write a check, because like no major curator is just scrolling on the toilet and like writes you a check. Like you have to be vetted through a system. And so that goes through, I do lectures at museums I show pre-pandemic, I had about 15 shows a year all over the world. And, just getting my work in front of those people who then would make those decisions. Who wouldn't necessarily, not to say they don't find you through Instagram, but they don't trust you through Instagram in the same way that if somebody puts it in their museum and they see it, you come and give a lecture and you say, here's the reason it's valuable, and here's that I really did it intentionally. They'll trust you a lot more. So that's a fully different business than the sort of Instagram newsletter, like the really cool people I talk with all the time that sort of fills me up. But the business of sort of selling high-end art objects is talking, lecturing at museums, showing everywhere, but not necessarily just like, I produced a bunch of my own shows, and sometimes that goes great, and sometimes it is just my friends who already like my work coming over and eating at a taco truck, which is fun, but it's not necessarily sort of fiscally rewarding. So how do I share my business? Depends on the business, but it's to the end of who I want to engage with that business. So, that as I define it, it really helps me figure out how to kind of do that sharing and where. Also, I wanted to, someone asked me, and I don't know if it's like super gauche, but someone in the chat asked me how much is the most I've ever sold one for. And, I've literally never told another human this, but it's $78,000 I sold a quilt for. So
that might be the highest living quilter number. Yeah. Let's make that.
You heard it here first, folks.
Look, it's not all the time. And if anyone else wants to buy one for that, I've got several, but.
Is that a negotiation or just a price you put and it happened?
There was the price I put. It was for a corporation. So I was able to kind of pick the price.
Yeah.
Now, that does get me to just a question I've been real curious about, is that balance between having your prices on your website and then even further having a shopping cart on your website, to the price is super secret and you have to go to the gallery and ask for the little piece of paper because it's not even next to. I would love to know where a price like that kind of falls on that spectrum. Do you think it's death to have your price on your website? Is it like, it's because I always feel so torn between the art world and the quilt world, and the way things are moving forward, and maybe galleries are changing, like just the way things are changing as well.
I mean, there's a huge change in ethos about buying online, right? Like 30 years ago, nobody in their wildest imagination would buy anything online more than $100, And now you can buy an airplane sight unseen off of eBay, right? Like, so there's just a big change in the way that people are shopping. I don't know. I personally don't know the answer to that. Like, it depends on your audience. Like, if I have quilts for $5,000 to $15,000 on my website, people who come through looking for like a quick weekend present for their niece are going to go, oh my God, but also, so gosh, there's a lot to it. The people who want to request the price sheet at the gallery are buying for their ego. Sometimes they are buying that they have to find that price sheet and then they can access it. Like, they're buying an access to you that nobody else can get. And that's interesting, right? I'm not saying that as a diminutive way, but like someone who goes and spends, $5,000 to $50,000 on an object wants more than just clicking a link and having it shipped to them. They want that free champagne. They want the artist to show up and talk to them through it. They want someone to bring it and hang it and explain it and really give them the narrative. Because that's what they're buying. That's one of the things that they're buying. They want to buy the culture and prowess of owning something of that value. That's not to say nobody would buy something of 50,000 by clicking it on your website, but I do think that a lot of people with that kind of discretionary money are buying part of a culture. And so that's why that's why galleries don't post prices. They want people to feel proprietary and special. And if you have to ask for it, then there's this sort of little ego move about like, well, I actually can buy it. Thank you very much. And then they might, right? Like that is kind of part of the, those boutiques that have 4 pairs of pants and you have to like talk to the person who's kind of unfriendly in the back. Like part of it is like, I actually can buy these pants. Watch me, it's calculated. So I have no idea the right answer, but there is reasons that people make some of these choices. I mean, it'd be much easier if it was all transparent, but we all have to play these games because you do want to give people what they want. And if what they want is like, if somebody wants to buy another $78,000 quilt and they want me to fly it to their house and hang it up and watch their kids and teach them how to quilt, like I will do it tomorrow. But like, also maybe I want someone to just buy it off the website. Maybe that's what they want. So there's no right answer that I've found.
That's so interesting though. Thank you.
I love it. It reminds me, just this very quick thing, Jesse James, that like Pope of Welding guy that lives in Austin now. He has this guy that helps him sell his choppers and weird other big things that are expensive. And he got me on the phone. He wanted some quilts in the collective. And long story short, I just was kind of asking him, what's your angle? How do you sell? What's going on? And the big real thing is you have to pay to be on the VIP list. You have to pay to get the first look at what comes into their collective. And that VIP membership, to just know what's available to buy, that's it. Like, that's how it starts. And I was like, interesting, just learning about the VIP big ticket world. Same thing as the gallery, but that's more online. And he has everyone on text messaging. So if you're on the VIP, he'll connect with you and all that, the connection, that feeling, that everything you were just saying.
That might be a good segue from Heidi, your question to questions I see here in the chat. One of them, and we'll get to the chat actually in just a second, but one that somebody asked me earlier this week, Kirsten, if you're here, this is for you. She wondered, what are some alternative businesses that we've seen that are textile adjacent, quilting adjacent, for somebody who might feel like they want to keep their quilts to themselves, but they still want to make some kind of dependable income related to what they love? What are some ideas or things that you've seen?
Vintage collections, selling, antique dealing, natural dye yardage, yarns, prints.
I mean, I'm such a sort of one of these, turning in my professor side where it says let me answer your question with a question, which is, what are the components of your work that you love the most?
Yes.
Do you have access to those in a way that someone else might not easily? Sell that, right? Do you dye your own fabric for your quilts, but you don't want to sell your quilts? Sell the dyed fabric. If you are a brilliant vintage shopper and you use a lot of vintage quilt block sheet things, find those and sell. What is your skill set that you can sell?
Yeah, I think about consultations too. Is there something that's just in your brain that you could sell if you don't want to sell a physical object? I know in the past, I've hired for an antique quilt that I hired a person who looks at it and says what it's worth.
Historian.
There's a different word. But anyways, someone who can, if you're going to ascertain the value of something, there's certainly some training and stuff. Being a judge like for different quilting shows and things, you get paid to do that. That's a good question.
Ready for another one?
Yeah.
Okay, and y'all out there, if you still have questions, type in the chat, I'm watching. So Becky was wondering, Becky, I believe it was you, what concerns do we have that by sharing so much of our process, either on social media or through classes that we teach, that we're gonna like create our own competition and drive ourselves out of business? How do we think about that?
I want to say it real quick because it's happened to me. I just keep my chin up, keep looking forward. And the thing is, not worrying about it is chasing the next thing that I'm thinking about. No one has my brain, no one has my, fingerprints. So being original and knowing you are original, I do feel like I'm speaking at a point where I'm not like, my momentum's not high, where I'm not giving a lot away and I'm not doing a lot, but it's happened to me and the feeling is weird. But I think my reaction speaks louder than anything when someone's like, hey, did you see that person like is basically your doppelganger? And I'm like, yeah, doesn't bother me. I'm still doing what I'm doing and I'm going to keep going and I have my next great idea. They can just chase me if they want, but like that's kind of been my attitude about it. And I think just that confidence, not worrying about it and not even tracking them down or saying anything is kind of the breath of air that I keep going forward with.
I get that a lot because I teach a lot as well. And I, initially when I decided I wanted to be a quilter, I had this weird thing because I would Google the word quilt and I would think I'm not attracted to anything that's popping up when I Google the word quilt. And I by myself cannot change that Google search result. But if I teach and share a lot and share different ways of making a quilt, then maybe that can have an impact on what pops up when you type in that word or search for that, or what just collectively comes to mind when we think of quilts. I also think about I'm certified as a yoga therapist, and most people don't know what a yoga therapist is, but it's a really wonderful healing modality. And if you add more yoga therapists, what happens? Like the ideal is it becomes as common as a chiropractor. Everyone knows what a chiropractor is. There's one on every friggin' street corner in every town. And how helpful is that? It would be much easier to be a yoga therapist if it were as well known as just a vinyasa flow teacher or a chiropractor or something of that nature. So if there truly were a lot more quilters who were serious, we would have some of the infrastructure that painting or sculpture or other art forms have potentially. So the idea of having quilting grow really big could actually be tremendously helpful for everyone who's currently in the field and wouldn't take anything away from any of us, but would actually make it much more successful. So,
I mean, that's partially true. Yeah. I mean, so there is a distinction between product and service. Yoga teachers service a very, like Bikram is a product, right? So like if someone else did Bikram's 23 moves, that muddies his income. But if someone's a yoga teacher and someone else is a yoga teacher, that doesn't do the same thing. So if someone is copying your quilt types, it's very different than more quilters making very different quilts. So there's just there's sort of distinct conversations. You're exactly right. The more people making quilts as a word, the more people can see it as an actual viable, valuable art collectible item. Hell yeah. The more people making your exact object, the harder it is for you to sell your own, and so there's sort of, it's sort of maybe like horizontal versus linear, like someone making your own thing means that you can't go as far this way, but the more people going this way, the more market share there is, the more people can recognize it. So it's, somebody sort of doing Maura's work exactly is not helping her sell, but more people doing cool objects, even sort of hand-dyed, sort of, natural fibers, maybe can push people towards her because she's top of the game right here. So that's really great, right? That pyramid points at you. And so there's, there's some cool things going on there. So it's a hard question. You have to really get down to like, how close are they making it, and does it actually, but one of the things when I'm thinking about it, because it comes up sometimes, when I first started, no one's putting pictures of themselves on quilts. Now you see pictures all the time. Who are these people? But
Yep.
it pushes me to, like Maura said, I have to be better than myself. I actually can't just rest on the laurels. I can't just, Thomas Kincaid, make my light paintings forever and then go bankrupt. I actually have to be better than the versions of myself that someone can copy. And although that kind of sucks from an effort standpoint, it's actually amazing from a life purpose and legacy standpoint.
Yeah.
I would just, for some reason, I just step back into the classroom for a minute. And there's so much, teachers have so much conversation about how can we prevent kids from copying each other's answers on tests, right? And my answer to that always was, well, make a test you can't copy, right? Make it open-ended assessment, make it a creative project that you can't copy. And don't multiple choice needs to be thrown out, fill in the blank needs to be thrown out, make it creative and open-ended. So how that applies to quilting might be more to circle back where you started was, maybe somebody mimics your style, but you still had the facility, that faculty in you to come up with that initial spark. And that same faculty will create another spark that other person who's copying your style might not have.
They also do not have the same story. And just to Luke's point, that is what sells the quilt quite often, is where was it made? How did that person get their start? What is the background? Like who else traveled in an airstream and grew things and has that beautiful story that you have?
Yeah, and as long as it felt good to make, I don't know how it would feel to copy. Like that's not like that same feeling of making something isn't the same. You're always guessing, is it correct? Is it right on? Is it looking like this thing I'm trying to make it look like? But to be the maker, the generator, that's the value. You're driving that train. It's fun. You can go wherever you want to go. It's like no one's dictating the road. So there's choice. You can choose how to make.
I got 2 more questions for us. Number 1, Tanya wants to know, do we see a difference in value for where the quilt's intended to go? Meaning, like, is it a bed quilt versus a wall quilt? Is that something we take into consideration as we're pricing our pieces?
I saw that question in the chat and I immediately thought about the way that Luke always sleeps under every single one of his quilts.
It's an interesting question because we, as a culture, devalue functional items for a lot of reasons. We can talk historically about the people who made it are less valuable because they're just craftspeople. They're not aristocrats, so therefore they don't matter as much. Maybe it's made by women. They don't matter as much. Maybe the materials aren't as important. They don't matter as much. So there's a lot of historical precedent for reasons that crafts are less valuable, not necessarily for better reasons, just reasons. And I think there is sort of a functional, like, the more often you use a cup, the more chances are you're going to drop and break it. And so, like, you're not, chugging coffee out of a Ming Dynasty vase because, the kind of value of it is it's really, so because you could drop it, your coffee's going to stain the lip of it. So using a quilt means that you might have to wash it. You might get a rip on it. Your dog's going to jump on it. Your cat's going to vom on it. If you have my cat, nasty little thing. Only kidding. I love Grandpa. So if it's being in use, it may not last as long. So therefore, is it valued less because you're not going to be able to resell it, right? You probably won't. You probably love it and you probably use it. So, like, what that means is the value of it is not implicit to the object. The value is implicit to your experience. And the value that you have to give away, assuming you will never be able to resell it, is different than if you can resell it. So I think that there is a difference in value because being able to resell it. Now, this is all kind of like art world stuff, stick it on the wall, not necessarily sort of gifting through your family stuff. There's more value if you can resell it. Same as buying a car. If you buy a car that you're probably going to be the last user, the last owner, it's kind of rickety. It's worth less than something that's kind of a collector's item that maybe runs the same, but like you could resell it for more. So there's sort of that the tacked on, you know, there's an extra 10 grand because you can sell it for 10 grand. So you'll pay 12 instead of 2. But if you're only going to use it for 2 grand worth, you'll only pay 2. So that's, so it seems counterintuitive to be like, it's valued less because you can use it. Shouldn't it be valued the same because it's the same object? Well, you have to talk about the resale. You have to talk about implicit value. So there's parts of it that aren't kind of on the initial surface when you think about the value of something. If you can resell it for whatever X is, that X is on top of what you're willing to buy it for to use it, you know, to engage with it, right? So you can buy a Warhol because you know you'll sell it for at least what you bought it for, and maybe even slightly less, but you'll pay that a little bit overage to have it for a year, 10 years, whatever. So that is part of the difference in utility versus like hermetically sealed art object, because, you know, there's a bigger chance that an implicit value can go on to the next owner if you're not potentially using it to ruin.
Yeah, I thought of this the one time I went to a show and I didn't sell any quilts. That's not just one time, many times. But I was looking around the show. It was at the Hudson Brickyards in Kingston, New York. So it was like lots of cool New York people were up there. And then I was looking around, and the people who built out their booths, the context, it's all about context, lighting, furniture designers had like one textile on their one artfully made bed that was like, you could price that textile higher, look at it differently. You know, they built out a room, and we just, you know, we were cool and we're like more like DIY and less business, I guess. We were just like 2 friends hanging out and putting our work up for sale. We did get some leads and some things sold, but not expensive quilts. And I was realizing, damn it, I could have sold some expensive quilts if I was in the showroom environment booth. So just, it just dawned on me that it had nothing to do with my work and how I was speaking about it, how I was representing it, except for the context. I bet it would be a whole different ballgame just based on context, showrooms, and, you know.
Yeah, I think the space that you're in does inform things. I don't know that I have a really great answer about to sleep on versus not to sleep on. I am maybe kind of an adjacent answer. Right now I am making a quilt as a gift. I decided that for our 2-year anniversary, my boyfriend is quilt worthy, and I am making him a quilt to use on his couch when we watch TV, because the polyester, like, horrific thing that he has now is unacceptable, and I can't live my life like that. So so I am making a couch, like not a bed quilt, but a couch quilt, and intending for it to not be on the wall. I think that's a really great question, kind of in general too, is like, when is someone worthy of getting a quilt as a gift? Or, you know, what does that mean? And like in the knitting field, when is it not going to jinx things and we'll be breaking up next month because I made a knit gift? Zach, you got another question for us, or you want to answer about quilts and beds and walls?
I don't got anything to add to that. I love y'all's stories though. No, the last question I can actually just answer, because Louisa wanted to know if we wanted to share pictures online about what folks are working on while they're listening to us, what hashtag should they use? And the hashtag is soft bulk.
Yeah.
Hashtag soft bulk. I love those. Like when people take pictures of like their computer and the quilt that they're working on or whatever. I love it. I love it. So yeah, soft bulk is great. If you want to tag us, you know, with our apps, you can do that too. That way we're sure to see it. Yeah, I love seeing how this conversation interacts in other people's spaces around the world.
I'll say a lot of times if you tag me in the text of a post, sometimes I don't see that because I can only see the last 100 things that happened on Instagram, and that can move pretty fast. But if you tag me in the actual photo, I always see it.
Oh, that's a good tip.
Yeah.
That's a good tip.
Yeah, and I think it adds some richness to that line, that feed line in my Instagram as well as places I've been. Zach, you did have a really good, interesting question about age before. I don't know who asked that.
Oh, you want it? Okay, let's go there. So
that question.
Another question that came up this week was, what could we speak to business opportunities that are available for people who are not 30, 40 something like we all are, right? Like what can you do if you are retired? And maybe I don't know, different people have different circumstances, but what are some options or some ideas? And Heidi?
I loved that question because I often feel really inspired when I see, like, just scrolling through Facebook and stuff, these posts about people who kicked off their careers later in life. And sometimes through the internet, like we see actors or musicians who, if you haven't made it by the time you're 22, you're not going to make it. And there's so many other fields where people really do hit a high point, maybe in their 50s in their career. And certainly when I look at the artists that I love, that I went to the Whitney when I was in New York recently, and I was so excited to see the Julie Mertu show. And I was like, yeah, she's 50. There's still time for, like, most of the time when I get my art nerd hat on and I go see a lecture from someone I love, they are older. They are not younger than me. They're like solidly older than me. I also feel so inspired by my friend, Rosemary Allison. She was in the Seams show that I co-curated a little over a year ago with the Portrait Society Art Gallery in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. It's one of my favorite galleries in Milwaukee. The gallerist, Deborah Bremmer, was scrolling through her Facebook. I don't know if she's sure why she was already Facebook friends, or maybe someone reshared or posted, but Rosemary was in her 70s and posting about the cool stuff she was making and the cool quilts and patchworks she was up to. And Deborah saw that as it was probably reshared through Facebook and just loved the work, reached out to her. Now Rosemary's represented by Deborah. She's, I think, one of the best-selling artists at the gallery, does huge international shows and art expos and things. And it's so inspiring that that happened in her 70s. So I think there is truly no time limit on when you can be an artist, and also when your art can transition, where you can move from just making something privately in your home in a personal practice to being part of that larger, more public conversation, and just like selling the crap out of your art. That Rosemary and Deborah, they know how to sell quilts.
I would say, because I had a conversation with an artist friend of mine who's in her late 60s.
Yeah. And
we were talking about, yes, first of all, amen to everything you just said, right? No doubt about it. But I do think there are times when, like, it behooves any artist trying to, like, break, or any business person breaking into the field, to realize, like, how money moves and how people are making decisions. Because I was having this conversation with that artist friend of mine, and I'm like, you got to get on Instagram, right? Like, that's where it starts. Like, I wouldn't know how to advise somebody who wanted to make money but didn't want to use social media, right? To me, it is a critical component anymore. Maura, you're like, maybe not.
No, I believe you. I believe also what Luke was saying too, about there's a whole nother world out there. It's not old school. It's just like a other league. People are representing, people don't have time. People have so much money, hire people to do their stuff for them. And there's, like, you know, interior designers and things like that, but they also are looking for social media. I think you got to cover all ground.
Yeah. It's a big world.
Yeah.
Shall we move to closing comments?
Yeah.
Wrap things up?
Yeah.
I mean, I would just say that I did not get into quilting for the money, but it is a fact of life, and we got to keep the lights on and keep food in our bellies, like Luke says. So it's walking that balance and trying to find that good line that'll lead me eventually to the good life, whatever that is.
So I actually got into quilting for money. I left architecture because I wanted to be a fine artist. And like, I knew that it was one of those big and way out there potentials, right? Like some artists sell for $1 million, some artists beg on the street for canned goods. Like I get that, but I actually did it intentionally to make the income that I can develop architecture. So just to say my initial push was exactly opposite. And I'm certainly in a different place now in life. When you're in your early 20s, you're like, I'm just gonna go sell a bunch of stuff for a lot of money, no problem. But yeah, it's the opposite.
That answer gives me a way into answering Zach's prompt. I was a teacher and I did not have a master's degree, and I was looking at my financial trajectory, which was 100% spelled out for me, and I was going to reach the cap, and I thought, wow, that's really not that much money. And I looked at, what if I got a master's degree and went higher on the pay scale? And I thought once I did the math, it looked like indentured servitude to me, that I would no longer be able to move schools because I'd be less hireable, or I'd have to like fight for my years of experience and my degree to count towards, which is just ridiculous. The teaching system is very frustrating financial one. So I was looking at that and I thought, I don't want to have to never leave my school district and work for 10 years to break even on the degree that I get so that I can get a raise. And that just looked horrific to me. And I thought maybe self-employment would be harder in the beginning. It's riskier, but also the reward is bigger. And it does inspire me to feel like my financial future is not set in stone, to have options, to not have that kind of cap on my financial future is really exciting to me. And while I have not yet broken even with where I was when I left teaching, I love that I could. And I do every year, I see that more and more in sight and in the realm of things that I could do and that I feel excited about. And just, being in charge of my life as a self-employed person. I know with Zach making that transition recently, like the three of us had a lot of group texts where we were clapping and cheering, and I forget the word we used for that, but I feel like
self-led life was what Luke said. Yeah, self-led life.
Yes.
Which is so much more than money.
Worth it.
But it's
but not for the faint of heart, It's ooh.
Yeah. You're telling me.
yeah. But in terms of business strategy, that self-led life is very inspiring. And to be able to see that wide open future is exciting.
Well, I'm going to jump in, Maura. I'll let you go last, of course, save the best for it. But I think that one of the sort of component, that self-led life, like for me, I was willing to have a very uncomfortable life for a long time. I lived in garages. I worked on a llama ranch. Everything I owned fit in my Honda Civic, and I moved across the country quite a number of times to find opportunity and affordable places to live and, feed myself. But that meant that every day I was building a skill set and hanging out with people who were interested in what I had to say and vice versa. And so for me, that was so worth it. But it was also so uncomfortable. So, there is something that seems so like possible and fun in the world of art, but it certainly isn't for everyone, and I don't suggest it for most people. Just to put that little caveat out there that when you start, it's uncomfortable, and that amount of time is not a choice you actually make. It is a choice that is made for you by your circumstance, environment, and the culture of spending money. And no matter how many Instagrams you do, it may or may not work out fast. So, the first bunch of years, and that number is determined by your tenacity and social group. And some of that kind of sucks, but some of it's also amazing. And, you can do some amazing stuff with canned soup. So, just to kind of put that little bit in there too, there's certainly something beautiful down the road, but the first bit of the road is rocky and rainy.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe, I don't know.
Maybe. More, you still get the last word.
But I sure can relate to Luke with being on food stamps. It is rough. So
right.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. You guys, all this is so, thank you for this conversation. Every one of you, all the comments that have come in, this is all rich. This is amazing. This is like church feels like for like the maker, you know, I feel thankful that this is a weird one to say. I feel thankful that I am not independently wealthy. I like working to create something because it ignites a feeling in my heart, a fire, and aliveness. Necessity is the mother of invention, and that creativity is beautiful. At art school, I didn't know what a trust fund child was. I learned that at SCAD because they were all around me. I had to say, Mom, what is that? Oh yeah, you're not one of those. I look at them, and time tells, in some ways that's a struggle to just have lots of money. It's not always easy to be an artist when you don't need money to sell your work. There's some propellant to that necessity that is joyful. It's like getting out there and working. You don't want to just sit. Maybe it sounds great to have a vacation and just sip, you know, cocktails on the beach for all day. You get bored. You want to connect. You want to be in the world. And I think I'll land on that, which is I love selling my work as much as I talk and entertain the idea of not and just selling, holding on to it. I love selling it because I love how it connects me with that recipient and the person in the world. And that connection brings me to alive. Like it creates this chase of like, well, I can't wait to make another one. I feel like I'm a part of them and they're a part of me, and this whole connection, we're all holding hands. Look at us, we're together, we're connecting. And yeah, it's just spiritual. And so there's like no wrong, right? It's like, yes, and all of this, it's a complicated conversation, because is it really about money?
Let's leave it there. Well, we end with the question we started with. Is it really about money? How much is a quilt worth? Who knows? Thank you all out there for staying up late. I see you, Marilyn, staying up late to watch this conversation with us, or for spending a little bit of your morning with us, if that's your time of day. This really has been a lovely conversation, and knowing that you're on the other end watching it and listening and sharing your stories in the comments, all of that really adds up to a beautiful, beautiful hour and a half. So thank you for being here. Any last word, folks? All right. We'll be sending out an email with this recording very soon. Look out for it.
Yeah, make sure you subscribe. Make sure you like on YouTube, like this talk. Keep the conversation going. There's some beautiful questions in the conversation. Add them to YouTube. I know that we went back and we read the YouTube comments from last month and really got so engaged and inspired. And so thank you, everyone.
Bye. See you next month.